Okay, we're now coming to the second part of today's meetup. And for this part, we have two very special guests from the Prisma team. We have Alberto and Tom, who are both working on the Migrate team. Welcome.
Hi, Daniel. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
So how are you feeling after the release yesterday?
Oh,
Good question.
a bit exhausted, but actually very happy to finally see this coming through. I don't know about you, Tom.
Yeah, I think everybody who programs for a lot has this experience of releasing a project after a month of work, and it feels good. It feels good.
Great. Well, you have a demo for us. So I'm going to give the stage to you. So now I'll take myself off, and the stage is yours.
Yes, I'm going to start first with a presentation, and then Tom is going to do a short demo. Going to assume you can see my slides. I'm not used to presenting in these streaming sessions. So today we're going to talk about the Prisma Migrate preview. And as you may know, it was released yesterday in preview in 2.13.0. Okay, so briefly about me. My name is Alberto. I'm based out of Spain. I'm a product manager at Prisma. I joined in March this year. And you can find me as Alberto Perdomo on the internet, Twitter, GitHub, and so on. And I work with Tom on the migrations team. So we're Tom, Joel, Matthias, and me. And our team charter is we want to enable developers to initialize and evolve their database schemas during the entire software development lifecycle. And this means that we oversee and work on Prisma Migrate, but also on other tools that are related to the managing your schema, such as introspection with Prisma Introspect, or another tool that we recently released in preview, which is DB Push, Prisma DB Push, allows you to do the opposite of introspecting your database, which is pushing your schema from Prisma to the database. And today our topics are going to be a quick refresh of database migrations. And then we'll talk about a bit about Prisma Migrate experimental, then Prisma Migrate preview, and then we'll have a short demo for you. And so first, the refresh on database migrations. What are database migrations at all? We all understand it's a way to manage your migrations, to manage your database schema. But what's really important about database migrations is that it refers to managing incremental changes to your database schema in a way that you can version control your database schema at any point in time. And they should provide a reliable, predictable way to execute these migrations in a way that, sorry about that. Okay. They should allow you to execute these steps, these changes in a reliable and predictable way, and so that any changes to the database are encoded in migrations, and they can execute it in the exact same way when needed to reach the desired end state. And this might be different to, let's say, to using other ways to evolve your database, such as when you use this tool that we recently released, DB Push, for example, that makes sure to bring the database to a desired end state, but you have no control or insight about how that end state is going to be reached. It just figures out what needs to be done to get there. And so let's talk briefly then about Prisma Migrate Experimental, the previous version that we had in the product that we replaced yesterday. So how it all came to start was as a team, in June, our team got together and we were tasked with bringing Prisma Migrate to general availability. And we wanted to first understand the state of where we were. And so, okay, it was an experimental state. It had started, it had been conceived in spring of 2019, and it was an evolution on the learnings from Prisma 1. And the design goals were to be a declarative system. That means instead of encoding the changes the way you want to execute them, you would rather encode the desired end state, and Prisma would figure out what needs to be done. To be database agnostic, meaning these migrations can be executed against a number of different databases, and to support team collaboration as a first-class citizen. And the way this workflow worked was you would first start by making changes to your data model. That's in Prisma, that's done by modifying your Prisma schema file. Then you will run a command called Prisma Migrate Save, and what that would do is generate a new migration in the form of a new directory. And in this directory, you would have a JSON file that's persisting the changes to the schema, and a copy of the Prisma syntax of the desired end state of this migration. Then you would apply this migration by running a command Prisma Migrate Up. This would read the migration and deserialize the change set and apply to the database. And then lastly, you would call Prisma Generate to make sure to regenerate your Prisma client API to make sure it's in sync with your updated schema. So since joining Prisma, I had already talked to many users. As a product manager, my main job is to talk to many users and understand their needs and frustrations and what delights them in their product. And besides that, the first thing we wanted to understand as a team was how well the experimental version of Migrate was working for them. So we talked to many people. We talked to developers who were using the experimental version, sometimes even in production. We also talked to other users who were using Prisma, but they were not using Prisma Migrate. And we also talked to developers who were not using Prisma at all to understand what are the qualities that in general developers look at when looking at migration systems. And our goal was to understand what's working well in the current tool, what's not working well, what are the limitations, the bugs, the design issues, what's preventing new users from adopting it, and what are the things that future potential users of Prisma would be looking for in such a tool. And so the things that worked well were that migrations were auto-generated, so there was no need to write migrations manually. People find this tedious, and so that's something that they were happy to outsource to Prisma. It just worked. When it worked great, and it was like magic. It was database agnostic, meaning these migrations worked against a number of different database providers. When I say database providers, I mean probably in the sense of like different DBMS, like Postgres, MySQL, or SQLite. It does not require any database expertise because it's abstracted for you. It reads all you do is change your Prisma schema and generates migration files. And then the things that didn't work so well in the version or were missing, well, an important one was that the system was not deterministic. What this means is even though the change sets were encoded in these JSON files, the system would try to determine at runtime what to do with migrations. This means that migrations were unpredictable because depending on the actual state of the database, Prisma Migrate would decide to do one thing or the other. And turns out predictability in migrations is pretty important to most developers. You want to actually understand how a migration is going to be carried out, and also run it in another environment before running it in production to understand how it's going to be carried out and the actual result. And so if they work, if they can work in different ways depending on the state of the database, that's pretty bad. The system also could not always infer the intent from the changes. An example of that is if you rename a field, Prisma Migrate cannot determine if your intent is to rename a field or if you're removing a field and you're adding a new one. And based on this limitation, the current Prisma Migrate, Prisma Migrate experimental, what it did was it decided to drop a column and create a new column for you. And if that's not the behavior that you wanted, you had no way to deal with this. There was no way to express, let's say, encode this different strategy in the migration. There's no control over the migration strategy, and there's no escape hatch. So that means if you need to perform your migration in a certain way, or if you want to do something that Prisma Migrate is not aware of or does not support, it's impossible. An example of that would be you want to create database views, stored procedures, or triggers, which is something that the Prisma does not have the notion of. It's impossible with this system. And two other things is the JSON format. The JSON format for the changes, that works great for computers, but not great for humans. It's quite verbose. It's very long. It would be really hard for developers to change the behavior of certain migration, but also it's not even great for reviewing or understanding what's happening in a migration. It's more meant for the migration implementation itself. And the database agnostic aspect turns out to also have disadvantages, so meaning that, as I said before, the set of features that the migration system supports is limited to what can be encoded in the Prisma schema. And that means anything that the Prisma schema language does not support, it's unavailable for migrations. So with everything that we learned, we decided to go back to the drawing board and allow ourselves to question the design decisions that shape the existing Prisma Migrate solution. And so let's now dive into this evolved version of Prisma Migrate, which we released yesterday, as I said before. So how is it better? This new version uses imperative deterministic migrations. The migrations will be predictable, and you can write your migrations in your development environment and understand how they're going to behave in other environments, such as staging or production. We also abandoned the JSON format for schema migrations in favor of SQL or DDL. Using SQL allows developers to have full control and transparency over the schema migrations. And we also removed the magic aspect from such a crucial piece of your application code. While SQL might not be, say, everybody's preference, maybe some users who are not familiar, for example, it's also worth noting that when you are staying on the happy path using Prisma Migrate, there is no absolute need to write or customize these SQL files. We'll see more about that in a minute in the demo. Migrations are also still auto-generated for you. This is something that people valued in Prisma Migrate, and we want to retain that. We think writing up and down migrations manually is a lot of toil work. There's a lot that goes into it, and removing that burden from the developer seems like the right thing to do. When you're doing simple additive schema changes, meaning you're adding fields, you're adding tables. In fact, there's no even need to look into these files at all. But when you need to customize these migrations, meaning you want to orchestrate a migration in a certain way, you need to manipulate data in between changes. you want to change the behavior that Prisma Migrate is going to apply to a certain migration. Let's say you don't want it to drop a column and create a new one. Instead, you want to actually alter a column to rename it. You can do that. And you can also do that if you need to extend migrations to do things that are not yet supported by Prisma. So if you can modify those SQL migrations, and you can create sort procedures, triggers, and database views, and all of that. The workflow is fairly similar to what we had before. Now we've unified in development, we've unified this into one single flow and command. So it all starts again with making changes to your Prisma schema. And the next step is for you to call a command, Prisma Migrate def. What this does is it picks up changes to your Prisma schema, generates a new migration. This migration file, this migration has a SQL file with the migration script. It also updates the database schema by applying that migration, and it also triggers the generation for you. The reason we decided to include the generation into the tool is because we heard from users that often they would migrate the database and then forget to trigger the client generation, and they would get runtime errors because there was the client was not in sync with the schema. So it just made sense to update the client whenever updating the schema in development. And so once you're done, all you need to do is you commit the Prisma schema and your migration file to your repository. And from there, your colleagues and team members can check out these new migrations, run the same command, and they will figure out which migrations need to be applied, apply them, and so on. And we've also got a workflow that's aimed at deploying migrations. And we've heard from many people that they have automated CI or deployment pipelines. They were a bit frustrated as well because the previous Prisma Migrate was interactive. So often they had to somehow make sure they're providing certain options, they're passing certain options to the command to avoid the pipeline getting stuck in an interactive mode. But also by doing that, it means you're not there to make a decision when the tool is asking for it. And so what we wanted to do is to front load all of the decision making into the actual migration step. That means, like, if you by committing the file, you should understand what changes are being committed and how the migration will be carried out. If you want to understand how that works, you can look into the SQL file and understand, even if that's not the SQL that you would write, or if you don't have the level of knowledge that it's required to write the SQL, you can probably understand it, because understanding DDL is pretty reasonable. But once you commit this change to the repository, and all you want is to deploy these migrations, you don't want to be making decisions during deployment time, which is why we have this dedicated command called Prisma Migrate Deploy. And all it does is it checks based on the local migration files that you have previously checked out in your CI deployment pipeline, for instance, or locally. You will check for which migrations are missing on the database and apply those. And we've got there's few more details about the tool. There's few more capabilities that there are in for production deployments. We have a status tool that helps you understand what's happening with the database and the migrations. We also have a resolve command that helps you fix these issues. And the migrate def also helps you get back on track when you step off the beaten path. But that's probably too much detail for today's presentation. So maybe it makes sense now to move on to the demo, and maybe Tom can do a live demo, and we hope to not upset the demo gods.
Yes, it's always a risk. So yeah, I'm going to show you a little bit how it feels, how it looks like in practice in a project where you're using Prisma for the database, and a few things you can do with the tool. So I'm going to share my screen. I need a second. So an application window. Okay, this one. Can you see my editor? Yes. Good. So I'll be quick because a bit over time. But imagine you're on a fresh Prisma project. You have your schema that's empty. You have database you're connected to, but it's also empty. And you want to start coding a block style application, let's say. So you start as usual. You're going to add a few models. Yes. And where I'm diverging from the workflow we're imagining is that you need to start using Migrate. You can, of course, use Migrate from the start of your project. But maybe at the beginning, when the project is still in a very fluid state, you want to use DB push. So you change your schema, use DB push. Your database schema is going to reflect your Prisma schema, and you don't have to worry about migrations. But at some point, you're going to want migrations, and it doesn't have to start from the beginning with migrations. Yeah, so we are going to have a user model for applications. We're going to have a post model for something like a blog post. So also there, and there's a relation between the two. So posts have titles, I imagine. And then there's a author.
Hey, Tom, could you please make it a bit bigger for us?
Bigger, yes. Is it better?
One more would be great. Fantastic.
Okay. Yeah. So here we are with our first models. And now we want to generate a migration to actually make these models appear as tables in our database. So I'm using Postgres for this demo. And the command we're going to use is Prisma Migrate dev for development. You need to pass the preview feature flag. And it's going to do two things. So, yes, it's going to ask for a name. Initial migration. Let's give it simple name. So it says it generated the migration, it says it's generated the Prisma client, and that everything is now in sync. And if you look at the migrations folder, it did generate a SQL script where it created a table for users, created a table for posts, and then did a bunch of things that you don't need to worry about that. And that's already applied to the database. Your client, Prisma client, is already generated, and you can already use it. So I took a slight shortcut, and I already wrote seed script, which is something you would want for that kind of applications, because in a lot of cases, it's easier to just wipe the database, start from scratch, and have a seed script that's going to put seed data in the database that you can use for testing and development. So I already wrote the script, but you can see it's just a basic TypeScript file, imports the Prisma client, and puts data in the database. So it's going to create one user, create a second user, and create a post and associate it with the first user. So I'm going to run that script just to check that it works. Okay, we created two users. We can go on. Now I want to add a third model. So I'm going to add tags to the posts. So that has an ID. That has tags have titles as well, I imagine. And so a tag is associated to many posts, and a post may have many tags. So it's a many-to-many relationship between the two models. But here I don't want tags that contain a whole, like the Prisma schema isn't super precise here on what we are intending to put in the database. So if you have the post contents, for example, it's a string that can be very long. If you have a tag, like you expect the title to be pretty short. So we can encode that in the database in Postgres case. You could have check constraints and all sorts of things, but we just want to change the type of the title column. You'll see what I mean in a second. So I'm going to run Prisma Migrate dev again, but pass the create only flag. And what this does is it does exactly the same thing as migrate dev, except it's going to not apply the migration. So it's going to generate the migration and stop there. You can use that when you want to edit the migration before you apply it to your development database. So we generated a second migration, and the second migration created the many-to-many relation you see here, and the tag column. And what we wanted to do is the tag table, sorry. We wanted to limit these the tag titles to 1,000 characters, 100 characters. So you can change the types of generated columns in the migrations because we are going to run exactly that. And any SQL you put there is going to be run exactly like that, so you can customize things. So we are going to run dev, is going to apply that, and then we have that we have tags in our database. But maybe it's ambiguous to have posts with titles and tags with titles. So we decide in the end, maybe I want to call that column name instead. So with migrate until yesterday, it would drop the title column, create a name column. And in this case, it wouldn't even work if you have data because it drops a required column and it creates a new required one. And yeah, it's causing a lot of complications. What you want is just rename that column. And until yesterday, there wasn't a way to do that. We might make it more high level, but at least now we have the escape hatches to at least allow that. So rename tag title. So since you can change the SQL, you can see that migrate would drop the title column and add a name column and lose the data in the process. What you can do instead is just edit the migration, rename column title to name. And now you can run that. So that shows how you can edit the migrations. Let's see another case where you would want to edit the migration. It's when you want to do data migrations. That's also something we didn't support in the previous migrate. So imagine our users have a first name and a last name. We are going to make that happen in the database. Ah, yes. So we are in a case where we have data already because we seeded. And we are adding required fields. So there's nothing to put in these fields, and we can't put null because they are required. So that migration can't be executed. So that's one case where you would use Prisma Migrate reset. Yes. We are fine with losing data because we have a seed script. We can run it again. In general, it's good practice in development. Oh, what do I have here? Oh, that's interesting. So my seed script, since the Prisma client is regenerated all the time, my seed script doesn't type check anymore. So let's see. Yes, we have two new required fields here. So we have first name, last name, oh, that's me, and Tim. Okay. And we're going to run that script, and now that works. Oh, the current name does not exist in the current database. That's the magic of demos. We run the migration. Ah, yes. We didn't run that. So we have that migration that adds these 2 columns to the database now, and it's been applied. So now we can run the script. Yes, good. So what I wanted to show is, imagine you realize in your application that first name, last name doesn't fit. Like some people only have a last name, some people have middle names that they care about, and you just want to simplify things and have a single name column. But you still want to not lose your data, right? So what you're going to do is what we call what's called an expand and contract pattern, where you first, so you want to move from schema A to schema B. You're first going to add the things that you want in schema A, then migrate your data you want in schema B. So we're adding the new field. It's going to be empty. Then you move your data, and then you clean up after that. You remove the old tables. And depending on your data volume, and if you have migrations that run over huge tables that may take hours and you want to do it without downtime, you can split that to be very fine-grained and write to the old fields and the new fields, and then to do the data migration separately and all that. But we are on a very small scale. It's a very new app. So we are going to do that in a single migration. It's the last step I wanted to show. So we are going to add that name step. Add migrate name. We have that name step. And what we're going to do is we have, so after that step has run, we would have both the old and the new values in the table. So we would update user, set name, and we are going to just concatenate first name column and the last name column. I hope I didn't make any syntax mistake. And here I edited the migration. So it's already applied, but I edited it. And the dev command is very strict about making sure your database reflects the migration files. So it's going to ask me to, whoop. Yes, syntax error. Update. Was it update from? Oh my, I'm tired. No. Let me see. What did I get wrong? Anybody has an idea on the chat? Yeah, so you see the downside of this approach right now is that we are still using SQL, and if you're not used to using SQL, let me check. Oh, that's very embarrassing. Let's see. Okay, I don't get what I did wrong, but I saw Hervé's comment. Oh yes, okay, so I fixed it, and okay, so that was right. I don't know what was wrong before, but so you can update the data, do any kind of data migrations. Right now it has to be SQL. We're looking to see, okay, is it going to stay that way or not? We are taking all kinds of feedback, and we are interested in everybody's feedback. But yeah, and so Migrate is very strict about sticking your database schema with the migration files in development. So it's going to ask me to reset the database, which is why it's nice to have a seed script. But here we have that migration that does that change and then copies the data. And then we are free to remove the old fields in the next migration. Clean up things. So that's all I wanted to show, more or less, for today. And I hope it gives you a good feel of how it works. I don't know if we have time for questions.
Thank you, Tom. That was great. So we saw quite a few of the workflows that are supported. And we had a question that was already answered, but perhaps you want to chime in on how to approach essentially migrations in multiple environments.
Yes. Yeah, so I already replied in chat, but the workflow, so it's a tool that's kind of baked in to a workflow where you have dev in development. And basically you're working with a development database that's disposable. In a lot of cases, it's going to ask you to reset the database and reapply the migrations from scratch, so you don't have to maintain down migrations. And it's going to tell you exactly when you need to do it and do it for you. But that means also you have to not care too much about your development data. That's why you should have a seed script that can be, like me, like I showed you, a Prisma client, TypeScript script, perfectly normal, that just puts data in the database. Can be a SQL script, can be an import from a CSV, can be anything. So you have this development flow where you basically are going to reset all the time. And then when you're ready, you merge your, so you commit your migrations, you get that hopefully code reviewed, and then you merge them to your main branch where you can do that manually at the beginning, but usually you'll do that through CI. Once your code changes are merged, there's maybe a manual step, or maybe it happens automatically, but your code is going to get deployed. And at that point, you use Prisma Migrate deploy that will run the migrations as they are saved in your migrations folder.
Great. So on this note, I'd like to wrap up this talk and thank you once again for the demo and thank Alberto. Do you want to mention a couple of words on what's coming up for Prisma Migrate?
Yeah. So one big limitation we have right now with Migrate is that we have this new feature that's like touching the whole of Prisma that's already supported in client and introspection. That's native types. And that's not supported in the new Migrate yet. And of course, we want to support that all across Prisma. So expect to see that. It's hard. It's a big feature, but we'll work on it. It's a priority, and expect to see that in the not too distant future.
Yes, I'll bring Alberto also. Alberto, welcome.
Hi. So yes, besides native types, as Tom said, a few other things that we're looking into. One of them is seeding. So seeding has been a long-standing request for quite some time. And as you may have seen, it's quite critical as well, especially in a context where we're resetting the development database very often. So we're very likely to look into that in the near future. And then some of the other topics that we may look into are rollbacks or down migrations. Some people have expressed that they would prefer to have down migrations. We think that's a burden for most of the users, but we recognize some people want it. So we're either looking into some kind of down migrations that are opt-in or some other mechanism to roll back migrations. And the other topic is DSL for when you need, especially for dealing with data manipulation. As you may have seen, it might not be as straightforward for everyone to write SQL, and we're aware of that. And so this is something that we would hope to streamline in some way.
I see. And with regards to the native types, basically the idea would be, right, that users would be able to similar to how Tom had to modify the type from text to varchar. With native types, you'd be able to do that directly from your Prisma schema by annotating the field. Is that the sort of intended goal?
Yeah, there's two sides to native types. One is there's a feature called native types that's currently in preview, and once Migrate supports that feature, which hopefully soon, what it means is you can use these custom types in your Prisma schema, and Prisma Migrate will pick the right column type for you and make all of that seamless, so it's transparent. You don't need to actually go into the migration and edit it. However, there may still be types that that you may want to use, which are still not supported by Prisma. An example of that would be maybe you're using PostGIS and you want to use geometry columns. And we still want to enable developers to use these kind of types, even if they're not supported in Prisma schema. And for that, we also need to do changes, not only to Prisma Migrate, but as well to the Prisma schema to allow some kind of column types to be ignored, or columns to be ignored by Prisma.
I see. Great. So on that note, let's wrap up. Thank you once again, Alberto and Tom.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.